Alrighty, guys. Today we're going to be talking about the business cycle. But first, I wanted to kind of recap over what we looked at with unemployment last week. All right. So first off, let's look at this hypothetical. So the U.S. experiences a recession from March 2001 to November 2001. All right. So during this time, companies laid off many employees, and later many of the employees were rehired when the economy recovered. Which of the following types of unemployment best fits this description? So let's take a look at each of them again. So we've got frictional unemployment, structural unemployment, cyclical, and seasonal. All right, so let's recap over each of them. First off, let's remember that frictional unemployment is voluntary unemployment. It's when someone's choosing to leave their job or going to another job. All right, so whenever I left my job up in Athens to come down to Brunswick, I was frictionally unemployed for a small period of time. All right. Whenever I was in high school, I worked at a Papa John's and they couldn't give me enough hours, and so I ended up leaving that Papa John's to go find a better job. So during that time, I was frictionally unemployed. All right. So structural unemployment is when someone's skills no longer fit the structure of the economy. Right. So if you think about people that used to make CD players, right, we don't really need them in our economy anymore. So eventually, those jobs disappeared. On the other side, you could look at auto manufacturers. A lot of auto plants like Ford and Chevy moved down to Mexico to produce their vehicles because of cheaper labor costs. So when they left, there's a lot of people left unemployed from these factories. They became structurally unemployed. Cyclical unemployment is going to follow the business cycle, which we're going to look at today, which is just the rising and falling of our economy. All right, so cyclical unemployment occurs during an economic downturn. So like right now, a lot of Americans are cyclically unemployed. All right, not because they're bad employees, but because when COVID-19 hit, a lot of places had to close down. So like a lot of restaurant workers, for example, became cyclically unemployed. All right, because we're in a downwards part of this business cycle. And seasonal unemployment occurs during certain parts of the year. So you can think of shrimpers, you can think of lifeguards. They would have a job during certain parts of the years, but not others. So with this example, if we're looking at someone becoming unemployed during a recession, then that would be cyclical unemployment, because a recession is when our economy is declining over a period of time. And so that would be cyclical unemployment. All right, so let's look at this business cycle in a little bit more detail. All right, so first off, when we're looking at any kind of cycle, we're looking at something that goes around and around. Like think about a bicycle, right? It keeps going around. Or the water cycle. Water evaporates, it condenses, and it falls in the form of rain. Well, our business cycle is the same. All right, so when we look at this business cycle, we're really just measuring our GDP over time. So we got time, all right, so we got GDP, all right, we got time. And so just think of like a line graph, right? So the normal pattern is that our GDP will grow, and then it'll level off and slow down for a little bit. Our economy will grow, and then it'll slow down a little bit. Grow, slow down a little bit. So just to kind of look at this, all right, if we're looking at a timeline, we can look at like, let's say 2008 here. So in 2008 was our last recession. All right, so this is right before Barack Obama took office. All right, we have the George Bush era. It's growing. It starts to level off. Our economy starts to decline. Obama takes office. About 2010, 2012, or 2011, our economy levels out. We start to grow again. We've been growing until about this year, right, when the pandemic hit. All right, then our economy is declining again. People are losing their jobs. People aren't spending as much money. All right, so hopefully our economy levels out and starts to grow again. But this business cycle just follows the rising and falling of our economy over time. So no matter how, like if you look at our last period of economic expansion, it was the longest one in history under Obama and Trump. From about 2010 until about 2019, we had a pretty big period of economic growth. And so it was only a matter of time before our economy leveled out and started to decline again. And so we're going to look at some causes of this today, things that can shift these different parts of the business cycle. Hold on, let me make sure that you guys can see the writing on here real quick. Yeah, you can. All right, good. All right, so when we're looking at this business cycle, we break it up into a couple different stages. All right, so when our economy is growing, all right, we call that an expansionary period. All right, so between 2010 and 2019, we were expanding. Our economy was expanding. GDP is growing, new businesses are popping up. That's when we get that new Sam's Club, the new Panera Bread, all of that new stuff out there was during this last expansionary period. All right, and about March of this year, we hit our last peak. Think about a mountain, right? A peak is the highest point. All right, so that's where our GDP leveled off before it started to decline again. So the peak is the highest point of that business cycle. And again, our last one was in March before our economy started to decline. Before that, the last one was in like 2007, pretty much, before our economy declined under at the end of the George Bush era. So contraction, when things are contracting, they're getting smaller. So over the past several months, we've been in a contractionary period. All right, our economy's been contracting for about 6 or 7 months now. We haven't really started growing yet again. We're still on that downward trend. So our economy's been dealing with a high levels of unemployment, about 10% now, and our GDP is dropping. All right, so the trough is the lowest point of this business cycle. The trough is that point where we hit rock bottom, right? And so probably within the next couple of months, we're going to hit the lowest point that we are in this recession, right? And then we'll start to grow again. All right, at least we hope so, at least. So this trough would be ideal now. We're hoping that we've hit bottom and that we can start growing again pretty soon. So the last trough was again about 2008, all right, about 2010, when things got, as bad as they did during the recession, before we started growing again. All right, let me make sure, see if this is a part of your notes real quick. Yeah, I want you to go ahead and copy this down in your notes as well. It's just what we were talking about as far as the business cycle goes, right? So we've got that peak, our economy starts to contract. We hit that trough, all right, and we start to recover. That recovery period is right after the trough where we just start to grow again. Any point past where we left off before is now expanding. So think about it like a balloon, right? You blow up a balloon, all right, and you let out a little bit of the air. You blow some of the air back up to it, that would be the recovery. And then after a certain point, you're going to blow more air into it, and then you're going to expand the balloon to be even bigger. So the contraction is that time period where our economy is decreasing over time. A recession is just when we're in that contraction for more than 6 months. So at this point, we're in a recession now. Our economy started to decline in March, and it's been declining for over 6 months at this point. So we are in the middle of a recession now. And a depression is just a long, more severe form of a depression. But there's not any clear cut, this is a recession, this is a depression. But to put things into context, during our recession now, unemployment's at 10%. During the Great Depression, unemployment was at 25%. So it was significantly worse. All right, so like we were saying, and again, if you need to pause it and go back to get this down, you can. So the difference between a recession and a depression, the recession is just 6 months or more, or 2 quarters. So if you break up our 12 months into quarters, each quarter is 3 months. So 6 months or more of a contraction, and we have a recession. That's usually when the government will step in and start doing things to help get us out of this recession. So you'll probably see this over the next couple months, like that stimulus check that they sent out a couple months ago. All right, that's to try to get us out of this recession. All right, so you see an increase in unemployment, businesses closing down, and that's pretty normal during a recession. All right, like we said a second ago, a more extreme version of this recession is a depression, right? This is when unemployment gets out of control. This is when GDP really starts to crash. All right, and so we haven't really seen a depression in our lifetime. The last depression I think happened back in the 80s. So none of us at least were alive during that time period, myself included. But back then unemployment was up to 20%, so twice as bad as things are now. So this term stagflation is a combination of the term inflation and stagnant. All right, so what we see here is that the prices of goods are increasing, but wages are staying stagnant. And we see this during recessions all the time, but we see it in times outside of recessions as well. So like with teachers as a good example, since we don't get raises every year, if we're making the same amount of money each year, but goods are getting more and more expensive, well then we're dealing with stagflation. Our wages are stagnant, but inflation's still occurring. So that means that every year we're able to buy less and less. Now last year was the first year in 9 years that teachers had gotten raises, and so that was the first year that we haven't dealt with this stagflation. All right, and so let's talk about some things that can move us along this business cycle. So right now, our economy is contracting. What the government's trying to do is to try to level out our economy so we can start to grow again. All right, so things that we might see over the next couple months. All right, large amounts of business investment. All right, so the government, so individuals got those stimulus checks. We got $1,200, I think it was. But businesses got help as well. Small businesses got a lot of aid from the government. The goal was to make sure that they can stay in business, to make sure that they can still hire their employees. All right, we'll see interest rates drop down. Right now, interest rates on houses are as low as they've ever been, right? They're dirt cheap. If you have the money to buy a house now would be the time to do it. All right, in fact, my wife and I are looking at possibly moving into a bigger house just so we can, take advantage of this cheaper interest rate. All right, so expectations about the future is really important. So during this recession, all right, my wife and I have really cut down on our spending, right? We're trying to save up as much money as possible. But that's actually bad for our economy. If the money's just sitting in the bank, it's not going to businesses, it's not going to others. But if we were to go and buy, let's say, a new car, or let's say a new house, right? If we were to buy a new house, well, now the real estate agent gets paid. Now the plumber gets paid. The electrician gets paid. The landscaper gets paid. And that money goes into circulation. But if we don't go and spend money, then they don't get that money. All right, politics. Right now we see one of the biggest things that Donald Trump and Joe Biden are arguing about is what they're going to do for our economy to help getting it growing again. All right, and that's how a lot of people are voting this election. All right, the development of new types of technology can help us, right? So if you look at the Great Depression, World War II is one of the big things that got us out of it, right? Because we had to develop all of these new types of technology for the military, new planes, new tanks, all kinds of stuff, and that got people back to work. All right, and finally, we have these external shocks. So when our stock market crashed back in 2008, the rest of the world's crashed as well. Because so many other countries and businesses and stuff like that are invested in the United States, so when our economy does bad, there's a ripple effect to other economies as well. Same thing with the attack on 9/11. That crashed our stock markets and it crashed Europe's as well because they're so reliant on us. But all right, go ahead and switch over to the Google Meet and we'll talk about our activity for the day.